In February 1864, the missionary father Bernard Petitjean inaugurated the Ora Church in Nagasaki, the first modern Catholic building in a Japan that was reluctantly beginning to open itself to the West. A few days later, he saw about 20 peasants approaching him. After cautiously drawing near the sanctuary, then timidly kneeling before a statue of the Virgin, one of them turned to the astonished priest and said, "We have the same faith as you." In a country barely emerging from 200 years of closure to foreign influence, Sakoku, where Christianity had been forbidden on pain of death since 1614, the West thus discovered the existence of Japan's hidden Christians, Kakure Kirishitan. It was in 1549 that the first Catholic missionaries landed in Japan at Kagoshima on the island of Kyushu. Under the guidance of St. Francis Xavier, they carried out intense missionary activity, aided by a period of civil unrest, then dividing the country. The authorities, indifferent or even benevolent, sometimes made abandoned Buddhist temples available to the missionaries and left them free to preach their faith. In 2 years, nearly 15,000 Japanese were thus evangelized and baptized. Victorious in the civil war that had ravaged the archipelago, the warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi, endorsed by the emperor, grew wary of the rising power of European influence within Japanese society, both through the commercial penetration of Portugal, Spain, and the Netherlands, and through the missionary work of the Jesuits and Franciscans. This was all the more concerning since the latter were carrying out intense activity among the political and military elites. Converted nobles and samurai were particularly numerous. A first edict issued in 1587 forbade members of the ruling castes from converting to Christianity, while commercial activity was placed under surveillance. It was thus that the Japanese authorities regained control of Nagasaki, the port open to Western trade. It would take about another decade, however, before the complete prohibition of Christianity was proclaimed and widespread repression put in place. In 1597 came the San Felipe incident, which lit the fuse of an already well-primed powder keg. The San Felipe was a Spanish galleon driven onto the Japanese coast by a storm. The local authorities, invoking a right of possession over wrecked vessels, seized the cargo, which the Spanish crew disputed. A judicial hearing followed. The Spanish captain eventually lost his temper and, map in hand, amid threats, showed the assembly and the magistrate, Nagamori Masuda, the extent of Spanish territory and possessions. Japan appeared quite small by comparison. "How did Spain conquer such a vast territory?" the judge Masuda asked in astonishment. "The King of Spain sends missionaries throughout the world," replied Captain Matias de Landecho, "and their role is to conquer as well as to convert. Their aim is first to instruct the people, then to compel believers to bring the country into submission, even by military means." This excerpt from the hearing, reported to Toyotomi Hideyoshi, confirmed his certainty that the Westerners' true objective was the conquest of Japan, that the missionaries were its vanguard, and that the converts formed its armed wing. From then on, a deadly repression fell in successive waves upon Japanese Christians, while trade continued after a fashion until the definitive prohibition of Christianity, on pain of death, was proclaimed by the shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu in 1614. The number of converted Japanese is estimated to have been between 700,000 and roughly 1 million, out of a population of nearly 18 million. The Shimabara Rebellion of 1637 to 38, an uprising of mostly Christian peasants, changed nothing. In a Japan now completely closed to foreign influence, Christian communities disappeared one after another, victims of executions and forced apostasies. In reality, though very severely struck, estimates put the death toll at 40,000 to 50,000. Japanese Christianity would adapt, evolve, and transform itself, but it would survive. Forced to conceal themselves on pain of torture and death, the hidden Christian communities of Japan first separated themselves from all sacred books, Bibles, Gospels, prayers, the mere possession of which amounted to a confession. It fell to the priests of the community, who married and had children in order not to draw attention, to memorize the main passages and pass them on to their successor, generally one of their sons, thereby inventing, in the process, a hereditary clergy. Naturally, since this transmission was purely oral, with no further translation or explanation possible, it rapidly became a succession of phrases originally in Latin, mixed with Spanish or Portuguese words which eventually came to be used without their meaning being properly understood. Furthermore, prayers, hymns, and psalms were disguised under Buddhist melodies and chants. One can try to imagine one of these sacred songs after several decades of transmission of Latin words, learned purely phonetically, recited in the monotone cadence of Buddhist mantras. Objects of worship also underwent a remarkable transformation aimed at making them less conspicuous. While chalices and ciboria outwardly became simple kitchen utensils, distinguished from ordinary ones only by the discrete mark of a cross or a design representing a fish, albs, chasubles, and stoles, reduced to secular garments, became mere tunics or scarves bearing discrete signs. It was in the realm of sacred and divine imagery that these devices reached their peak. The hidden Christians, Kakure Kirishitan, drew heavily on the vast pantheon of Buddhism and Shintoism. Thus God the Father frequently took on the features and attributes, accompanied by a discrete cross, of Takemikazuchi, the Shinto god of thunder, or of Izanagi, the creator deity of the world, while Christ adopted the face of Tanokami, the god of farmers and rice, a familiar figure to rural communities, or that of Ebisu, the god of fishermen, always depicted with a fish. The Virgin Mary, especially popular among these clandestine Christians, was often portrayed with the face of Kannon, the Buddhist goddess of mercy, or of Jizo, the guardian of stillborn children. They were frequently depicted holding a child in their arms or with a basket of fish at their feet. Naturally, the isolation of these groups, cut off from any religious hierarchy, their faith nourished by texts learned by heart in languages foreign to them, was fertile ground for the emergence here and there of certain heterodoxies. One of the most widespread, though not universal, was the belief that God had ultimately forgiven Adam and Eve. These populations, steeped in a Shinto culture that has no concept of guilt, were indeed largely impervious to the notion of original sin. Taking this further, some groups even imagined that God had probably spared his son, since in the end there were no sins left to redeem. Finally, one of the striking features of hidden Christian liturgy was the existence, alongside the figure of the priest, of another indispensable character, the lookout. Within groups living in permanent clandestinity, constantly exposed to the risk of denunciation and arrest, the presence of a lookout, tasked with ensuring the safety of the ceremony, was probably just as important as that of the officiant. The most puzzling aspect of this survival lies in its persistence even after the end of the persecutions and the opening of Japan's borders. Indeed, about two-thirds of the roughly 30,000 hidden Christians recorded at the time rejoined the now authorized Christian churches. The others, since known as separated Christians, Hanare Kirishitan, evidently did not feel at ease within these new, open, missionary-minded religious communities. Perhaps, too, the liturgical divergences, the syncretism that had colored their beliefs and practices, and the forced taste for secrecy made reconciliation impossible for many. Absorbed into the fast-paced life of modern Japan, the last groups of Hanare Kirishitan are tending to disappear, though against all expectations, an unidentified community was discovered in the 1990s on the Goto Islands, its members emerging from clandestinity more than a century after the end of the persecutions. It should be noted that here too the figure of the lookout had been preserved, reduced to a few hundred practitioners, certainly no more than 2,000 or 3,000 across the entire Japanese archipelago. They embody, in their own way, a forgotten and marginal tradition of Christianity, not unlike that of the Petite Église in France and Belgium. Sometimes it seems fidelity alone is enough to make sense of it all.